My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And we do it with a gruff but reasonable amount of grit in our voice.
Yes, Beeper, good to see you. This new habit we have of doing an episode every 2 weeks means that we're just not talking as much because we do live in different cities. We don't get to hang out very often. So how have you been? How everything? You just moved again?
Yeah, I just moved again. I'm a world traveler or something. It was very quick, and it's not done, but it's mostly done. So it's good to have a long weekend to do it.
Okay, because in Canada we just had Remembrance Day, which for a lot of people in Canada it is a day off, and I guess it is for people in Alberta as well.
At least in schools. I also took an extra day off to pack because I needed it. Because we ordered the truck before we were done packing. Not a smart idea to do, but it motivates one to be more proactive.
Jam Jam's pretty young, so how is she adjusting to being in a new space?
The new space she's doing pretty well with. Although she did not sleep the best for the last 2 days, the main issue is less getting used to the new place. It's more the problem that she is not allowed to touch everything as much as she normally is because, there's boxes everywhere and things that we shouldn't be touching, and especially that a baby should not be touching, and that's been really rough on her, not being allowed to grab everything she wants to.
Aww. Well, I can relate to I've slept okay. I've been visiting Tater Tot out in Halifax and been sleeping on different people's couches. Over the last 11 nights, I've slept on 3 different couches, so I feel like I'm a bit of a couch connoisseur. I know what makes a good couch for sleeping on.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, couch surfing can be pretty fun if you make sure there aren't too many waves.
Hey, that's a good pun. I'm definitely going to use that. People listening to this, they might be wondering, why is this coming out on Tuesday instead of Monday? Because since the beginning of the show's history, our episodes have always gone up on Mondays. And I haven't even had a chance
There's been a few exceptions.
There's been some exceptions. Beeper, I haven't even had a chance to tell you this yet, but recently I've been really trying to find ways to celebrate a day of rest, a genuine. I'm not Jewish, so when I use the word Sabbath, I'm not converting to Judaism, but I mean Sabbath in the spiritual sense of the word, of having a day of rest and rejuvenation and doing things that restore my soul. Recording this podcast restores my soul. Editing and posting this podcast does not restore my soul.
I see, that's what it is.
So the routine I've had of recording the episodes and then editing and post them on Sunday nights is no longer going to work for me. So we're just going to start having the podcast go out on Tuesday morning. That way I can live a day of rest on Sunday, do things that are joyful on Sundays, and then I can do the work part of the podcast on Mondays.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to get your podcast on and still, which I thank you, because it's much better than recording on a Monday for me, at least, because yeah, we're all
Yeah.
very busy people.
I'm so jealous of I hear so many podcasters talk about having editors, and I'm like, man, that would make this so much more fun if I had someone doing all the editing for me. But of course, this isn't a
I
job. This isn't a job for us to
mean,
own.
Mjolnir's specialty is video editing, but you could talk to her.
Well, maybe we should. Yeah, that'd be fun to get Mjolnir involved as a producer for us.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
she does do sound editing in videos. Anyway,
okay. Well, for right now, anyway, that's the new schedule. We're
the Bad Jar
currently doing it.
Podcast, brought to you by Mjolnir Recordings.
Yes. So we're currently putting out new episodes every 2 weeks, and now they're going to start coming on Tuesdays instead of Mondays. I'm sure that won't be a problem. At least for me, a lot of podcasts I listen to drop new episodes on Mondays, so maybe maybe it'll be more special that it happens on Tuesdays.
Now there you go. And maybe we'll
Uh,
get letters of complaint, and if we do, we will reconsider it. But it's up to you to contact us.
yes. Now, when we last had an episode, we were going to do an episode today on the Andor Star Wars show. In between episodes, we learned that this Star Wars show actually is going to have 12 episodes in its first season, and not the usual like 6 or 7 or 9. And we talked about it. We're like, well, let's just talk about the amount of episodes that are out, and then maybe we'll bring it up again when the series was over. And we even had some of our podcast friends be like, why are you guys talking about the show before it's finished?
But I mean, you get a pretty good feel for a show before it's finished.
Yeah. So that was going to be our episode for today. And I was actually really excited to talk about it because I had watched most of the episodes that were available as of this week. And it starts off really slow, but it actually gets really good. So that's my initial comments on Andor. However, on Friday, November 11th, we in the world got the news that voice actor Kevin Conroy had passed away at the age of 66. And we're going to leave Andor till next time, which means that, or maybe we'll do Black Panther next time and then go back to Andor, who knows. But the point is, this week, we are not going to be talking about Star Wars. We're actually going to take time to celebrate the life of voice actor Kevin Conroy. If you don't know who that is, we're going to get into who he was. And
If you don't know who that is, this is your first episode of the podcast. Probably.
He has been brought up many times on this podcast since its inception. But before we get into him, we do have a couple Dooms delays. Nothing too serious here.
Still
Scream.
seems that it's still happening, though. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but I feel like the U.S. and Canada are pretty similar in that, like, almost everything has been dropped unilaterally for cautions, and there's no we pretend COVID never existed or doesn't exist anymore, despite the fact that there's more people absent from schools for sickness reasons than
I think
ever before.
Yeah, I think there's still a bit of catch up going on with movies that were supposed
I
to come out
suppose.
earlier. But then I also think what's happening now is that movies generally used to shift release dates within a couple weeks, and we didn't notice it or think about it much. But now Box Office Mojo literally has a portion of their website dedicated to release date changes. So I guess
because we've got a name for it now, we notice it.
Yeah, I'm more aware of it, I suppose.
We're becoming more of a movie podcast and less of a people talk about things podcast.
Some of these changes are so minor. Like, there's a movie about Whitney Houston called I Want to Dance with Somebody that had its release date changed from December 21st, 2022 to December 23rd.
I feel like when the shift is less than a week, it's
kind of not worth mentioning.
And probably not worth doing. I don't know. I feel like you end up losing on advertising and trying to change things probably more than you'd gain by changing it a few days. I don't know.
Yeah. So the two major, they're from the same studio, so it kind of it says something here. Scream 6 was supposed to come out March 31st, 2023.
There are 6 of them now?
Yeah, because they did the original 3, and then like 10 years ago they did Scream 4, and then just in 2021 they did Scream 5.
My
Or was that,
God.
or was that
Scream
maybe that
is
was
just
no?
becoming Final Destination.
Yeah, sorry. The last Scream came out this previous January, 2022.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's now
We
coming
can
out
talk
two
about that
weeks.
one day. Put
Yeah.
Final Destination in the
Oh,
podcast.
please no.
No, let's not do it unless it's requested. I mean, I love those movies, but they're terrible.
So Scream 6 is now coming out, I think it would be 3 weeks earlier on March 10th.
Okay.
Now, this is interesting because this is a Paramount Pictures movie, and they've also changed the release date for their Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie, which this is mainly why I brought it up. That movie was supposed to come out March 3rd. It's now coming out March 31st.
Okay.
So what they've done is they've pushed the release of their D&D movie almost a month ahead, and they've now pushed the Scream movie farther up because they've moved the D&D movie back. So does it concern you as a D&D person that this D&D movie is now coming out almost a month later than it was supposed to originally?
Um, I don't know. Did they give any reasons? Because I don't know. I feel like, especially recently, like, and I think like it was something that was bothering people, but I think Thor: Love and Thunder kind of cemented the idea that like we're having like there's problem with the visual effects being treated poorly, and if it's that kind of a thing, there are things that they legitimately want to take the time to do properly, then great. But I don't know. I'm really ambivalent about that movie. Like, I don't know. I just feel like D&D is something that you can't really ruin. Like, you can make it not appeal to certain people, but like I don't really care what other people think D&D should be. It's like it's kind of the point of Dungeons and Dragons is that it is so versatile. It is so dependent on who's playing. It's so different. Like you could make just about any movie and say it's D&D, and as long as you made all you need to do is make a passing reference to a saving throw, or just throw a beholder in there, or a displacer beast, or something like it. Like, just to say that it's D&D, take one of the iconic things they've got. But other than that, you can do just about anything, especially with the direction the company seems to be pushing the game to be less based on additions and more just a continuous role-playing game. I think that, really does make it so you can do just about anything.
So I've looked it up. It's the studio hasn't given any official reason for the release date, but the website Deadline suggests that there's a science fiction film coming out March 10th called
Oh,
65, and they're positing that by moving D&D's release to the end of March is that it'll have less competition. And it's like, because if it were to come out March 3rd, that means that in the second week it would have competition with this movie, I guess, in a similar audience.
I guess. I don't know. Science fiction and Dungeon and Dragon have a lot of crossover, but we talk about this a lot, nerd and geek, and how it's not always the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
I understand why they were doing it, but also, I guess it's
We
a good
don't even
thing.
know if that's why they're doing it. That's just
Yeah, that's true. If it was officially that was why they weren't doing it, then it'd be a lot more concerning.
So there you go. Those are the only doomsdays that are worth mentioning. Moving on to today's topic. Yes, Kevin Conroy. As Beeper has pointed out, if this is your first episode of the podcast and you don't know who that is, he is a voice actor, famous for many people as being the definitive voice of Batman. If you have listened to this podcast before, we've mentioned him many times because not only have we talked about the different projects that he's played Batman in, but we even did an
Which
episode
I believe is
ranking.
your favorite movie.
Mask of the Phantasm is among my favorite movies, yes. And at one point we did an episode ranking the movie Batman, and Kevin Conroy, because Mask of the Phantasm was released in theaters, we were able to include him in the list.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And people, whenever they ask, they find out I'm a Batman fan, they ask, who's your favorite Batman? And I always say Kevin Conroy, and people always say, who is that? And I die a little inside.
Yeah.
Um,
But then you tell them, and they know, and they tell you how great he is at it, and a little part of you comes back to life.
yes.
For you've shared a spark.
Yes. So, secret origin segments for Kevin Conroy. Beeper, I actually don't know. Like, I know because you watched a lot of stuff growing up in French. I don't know how you would have first been introduced to Kevin Conroy as an actor.
Oh, man. It is entirely possible that Batman Beyond would be my first introduction to Kevin Conroy's voice. Unless he did. No, I don't. He wasn't part of like the people who did voice acting for Cartoon Network in the 90s. Like, right? Because the Batman, like the animated series, one of his first roles, as I recall. Like, because he was a classical actor before he started doing that, right? So, like, it's not like what's his name, Rob Paulson, who or any a number of other voice actors who were in a lot of shows. So I think that because
Batman
I did
Beyond.
listen to a lot of things in French when I was a kid, and then the exception to that was watching Cartoon Network in hotel rooms on holidays. But yeah, as a result, and I did not watch Batman the Animated Series when I was quite young, so I do think it was either an episode of Batman the Animated Series that I randomly heard or watched with my cousins at some point, but more likely than not, it was him being the voice of old man Batman in Batman Beyond.
Mr. Wayne wants to offer you a job.
A job?
It's not much, mind you. I find that in my old age, I could use a part-time assistant. You know, a gopher. Go for this, go for that. An ally, as it were. Would you be interested?
Well, of course he would. Wouldn't you, honey? I mean, to work with someone as famous as Mr. Wayne.
Sure.
I warn you, I can be a difficult taskmaster. I accept nothing short of excellence from all who work for me.
I think I can handle it.
Very good then, Mr. McGinnis. Welcome to my world.
For me, as I've said, Batman the Animated Series and all its related media was how I was introduced to the Batman character and to superheroes in general. So Kevin Conroy's voice as Batman was the first time I'd ever heard what Batman sounded like.
Bruce.
No, not now.
You are a disgrace.
No, you are not my father. I am not a disgrace. I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
And as you know, we're going to talk about how he's died recently. I've seen a lot of people posting on social media. The comment I keep hearing is, when I read the comic books, it's his voice I hear as Batman.
Yeah, it's and it obviously your first experiences can be very forming, because I do know that like the first time I experienced anything Lord of the Rings related, it was the old animated movie for The Hobbit. And so ever since then, I've always had a bit like, despite the Peter Jackson films being films that I love and that I watch very often, there's a part of me that still pictures Gollum as he is in the animated series, in the animated movie. And to me, that still is what Gollum is, even though the Peter Jackson movie presents him in a way that makes a lot of sense for who he is in Lord of the Rings and in the greater kind of spectrum scale of the universe. But I don't really think of him that way. I think of him as like a kind of bug-eyed, almost Kuatoa-looking creature. Um, but at the same time, Kevin Conroy also kind of, defined what, because I feel like there's an interesting thing where there's like, especially with Batman, like we've talked about it a lot. There's a lot of like diehard fans, but there's a lot of like disputed opinions. But the two that seem to be pretty universal is that Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill are the definitive voices of Batman and the Joker.
And I just remember seeing his name and all the credits for all these things. And it wasn't until, I think, 2004, I got the DVD of the first set of episodes for Batman the Animated Series. I entered a contest with this magazine. You had to send in a drawing of Batman in order to, you could win the DVD set if your whatever drawing was picked, and mine was. So I got this DVD set mailed to me, and there was like a behind the scenes featurette about the making of the show. And for the first time, I saw what Kevin Conroy looked like, and
He kind of looks like Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I mean, like I've watched footage of him when he was younger, and I'm like, yeah, maybe if you had started playing Batman in like the mid '80s, you could have been a convincing looking Bruce Wayne. But he does look like an older, kind of skinny guy, and it was very almost off-putting to see Batman's voice come out of this person who looked like nothing like Batman in a manner of speaking. And then I got the pleasure to meet Kevin Conroy once at Fan Expo Canada 2016. He was there. He had a booth. I went up to his thing, shook his hand, took a picture with him. He signed an autograph for me. And then I went to a panel he had with Mark Hamill, and it was amazing. People who have met him, like again, people I've heard talk about his passing on YouTube and stuff, say he was always a very kind, generous, friendly person. And like my experience was very much like that. Like he had been sitting in there for hours, constantly greeting people, and he was still very friendly, shook my hand. It felt so weird meeting him because it felt like I had spent so much time with him, because so much of my youth was watching him play Batman through all these different shows and movies and video games, that it felt like I somehow knew him, even though obviously I didn't. Even
Yeah,
I was meeting him for the first time.
Especially like for you being such a big DC fan and having been such a big DC fan for so long, like that, it definitely does make a big difference, because you did consume like a lot of that media. Like I said, like it's more like it was more formative for you because like growing up French, but also not really doing anything much of watching things outside of what my family watched until I was in high school. A lot of the things that I don't know if I ever said, I think I've alluded to it in the podcast, but like most of my nerd and geek interests all came towards the end of high school or beginning of university, which, sometimes I know some people get quite surprised at how late I got into anime or into some other fandoms just because I didn't really get into it. So, it wouldn't be quite the same for me because, again, other than a few passing episodes, I didn't really watch Batman the Animated Series or even Batman Beyond until like most of it I watched after I graduated high school. So it's not something I necessarily grew up with. And actually, sorry, SOS, I just realized for my Secret Origin story, first time I would have heard him would have been watching Justice League. Because that I did
Okay.
watch a few episodes of when I was a little bit younger.
Okay, interesting. So, Secret Origin for Kevin Conroy himself. He was born November 30th, 1955, in Westbury, New York, which is on Long Island. So, it's one of the boroughs of New York City. He moved to Westport, Connecticut when he was about 11 years old, and then moved to New York City to attend Juilliard School, which is, of course, a famous acting school, where he was famously roommates with Robin Williams. And I've heard him talk about on about the experience of living with Robin Williams on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast Inside of You, and just saying like Robin's penchant for having all these different voices. He's like, it was even there at Juilliard, like he could hear him speaking in all these different voices from his like dorm room, and you can only imagine what that must have been like.
Good influence though, or a good kind of background if you want to become a voice actor though.
That's true. He was also classmates with Kelsey Grammer, the Frasier man / Beast himself. And he went on to become, as you mentioned earlier, a classically trained actor. And he spent the late 70s and the 80s doing theater productions, playing a lot of different characters. And then it seems like in the mid to late 80s, he did a lot of television work. He was a regular on this show. I mean, his first main role was on a soap opera called Search for Tomorrow. And then he played a lawyer on Dynasty, which was another soap opera. But then he had some, I guess you could say, unsuccessful terms on TV shows that only went on for 1 year, because he was in the show called O'Hara, which sounds amazing. It's about Pat Morita as a cop in Hawaii who uses spirituality methods such as meditation in his home shrine to solve crimes without the use of a gun or a partner, although he would use martial arts if necessary. And Kevin played a cop on that show. Does that not sound like an amazing show?
A little bit. I don't know. It also sounds kind of like I don't know. To me, it also kind of just sounds like a gimmick, a little bit too much, like a little bit too much of a gimmick. It sounds like an interesting show, but that like definitely would need a lot of polish on the execution, which I guess probably didn't have, seeing as it only lasted a year.
And then there was another show he was on called Tour of Duty. It was about the Vietnam War. It only lasted for 3 seasons, and he was only in 11 episodes of that.
Okay.
He made guest appearances on famous sitcoms such as Cheers, Search for Tomorrow, Matlock, and Murphy Brown. So he never quite found success, I guess you could say, as a television actor, never being involved in a project for more than a year or maybe 2 years. And yeah, the story goes, they were hosting auditions for Batman the Animated Series. They auditioned 500 people to play the voice of Batman, and Kevin Conroy went in because his agent said he should. All he knew of Batman was the Adam West TV series. He didn't even know it was based on a comic book. So he kind of came in with like very little knowledge of what Batman was. Apparently, again, listening to his episode with Michael Rosenbaum, he's like, "Oh, I wanted to play like Bullock. Like I wanted to play like one of the characters," and because he was interested in playing Batman himself. And the way he tells the story himself is that he read what was in the script, and he compared Batman to Hamlet, which was something that he was more familiar with because he had this background in classical theater.
Right. And I mean, there is something to be said, dead parents, a little bit insane, but not really, but kind of. Because, I don't know, there is that aspect of Batman where he's like, he knows he's not, in most versions, he knows he's not really okay. Like he's functional and he's okay with that, but he knows that what he's doing is kind of crazy and not to be imitated.
Yeah. So wouldn't you know it, his first ever voice acting audition, again, he's never done this before, his first audition, goes in, picked out of 500 different people as the voice of Batman and Bruce Wayne for this new show. What are the odds?
Well, 1 in 500 or 0.02%? Or is it 0.2%?
Yeah, to me, what this just shows like how important good writing is. The fact that he knew nothing of Batman beyond the Adam West series when he went to audition. says, yeah,
Well, not just that, but also I feel like, if somebody explains a character properly, even if you don't know it, you can still accomplish something that makes sense. If that, you know what I mean? Because, yeah, even if he doesn't know who the character is, then, and he still managed to give that kind of a performance, it speaks also to, the idea that voice actors are real actors too, though.
yes.
Because that is something that I get a lot of, and um, yeah, in order to be able to give, and again, you kind of alluded to that when you said if you look at him, you wouldn't think this is a guy playing Batman. You might, you're much more likely to believe that he'd play the Joker than he'd play Batman if you just saw what Kevin Conroy looks like.
True. That's actually true.
Like, no, but not just because he looks like Willem Dafoe, and Willem Dafoe is iconic for being bad guys, but like also just he does have a pretty skinny face and frame like the Joker does,
Yeah.
especially in the animated series. Like, again, if you were to put him and Mark Hamill beside one another at around past age 30 and ask which one was the Joker and which one was Batman, you'd probably get it wrong.
And I've looked through his whole filmography. It definitely seems from the time of Batman the Animated Series on, he has basically almost exclusively worked formally as a voiceover actor instead of on camera. And the thing is, like, we talk about him being a voice actor. He doesn't have a ton of range. Like, he basically just knows how to do this one part really, really well. Like, I compare him to, like, like Disney's mainstay of characters like Donald and Mickey and Goofy. Those characters have iconic voices, and what they have done throughout the years is that they continually find actors who can perform that voice.
Right.
And it seems like for Kevin Conroy, because he found an iconic Batman voice, he has been continually brought back for different projects. There are very few instances of him playing other parts in voiceover. Like he does not have a ton of range outside of just playing Batman very well.
Yeah, but also, but it is one of those things because there is so much Batman media and it's such a popular character. You can get away with something like that, and he's been he's been working being Batman probably for most of that time. Like, if you looked at I didn't look at it, but I'm assuming he did things almost every year, right? Like, he was still pretty busy being Batman. It's not like it was just, he did it for one series and then his career was over kind of thing.
Yeah. So, and again, we're talking about him today because unfortunately he died on November 10th, 2022 at the age of 66 from a short battle with intestinal cancer. I didn't even know he was sick. When my brother texted me to say that R.I.P. Kevin Conroy, I thought he was like joking. I didn't want it to be true. I actually...
Oh, considering your brother knows you.
Yeah. I was actually brought to tears. Just realizing that he had died, and it was so weird because like I don't know this man.
You've met him once.
I met him once. He's he's just an actor, but I think because he's been in so much media and he's played a character that has meant a lot to me so much that it did feel like he was part of my life, even though he wasn't.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and like, yeah, and I said you've met him once, but even if you had never met him, it probably would have still solicited a similar, if not identical, reaction. People underestimate the importance that a good series can have. And I remember, like, I do remember, like, on Facebook, people were posting. A good friend of mine was posting a clip from the episode of Justice League where he's like talking down. I can't remember her name. The girl who basically destroyed the universe.
Oh, Ace.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I know that there are a lot of people that episode just meant a lot to them because he does play a very, you know, a very convincing father figure without being one
Hmm.
in that like context. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like it is something that, spoke to a lot of people. And I think, performances like that can, maybe, well, they can be life changing
Yeah.
to people.
So on the whole, throughout the course of his career, Kevin Conroy played Batman and Bruce Wayne in 14 animated shows, spanning just over 400 episodes of TV. He played the character in 13 animated movies, including theatrical and direct-to-video movies, 16 video games, and one live-action episode of television that we will get into.
Yeah, so like I said, it's not, it's not like he did it once and was done with it, right? And you can bet that if you watched the first episode of Batman the Animated Series and the last thing he ever did as Batman, like, it wouldn't be exactly the same performance either. It would be the same voice and the same, feeling behind it, but it wouldn't be exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Now, I think the time in which I grew up was just, I guess, perfect for being associated with Kevin Conroy's Batman, because I was born right before the animated series started, and like I said, the animated series was my first exposure to Batman. But then continually for over the course of like 14 or 12 years, there just kept being more and more content available where he was the voice of Batman. Not only did you have the animated series and its kind of continuation in the new Batman Adventures, but then you had his appearances on Superman, Static Shock. They made Batman Beyond, and they kept him as the old version of Bruce Wayne because it's set in the future. And then they made Justice League, and then Justice League Unlimited. So, and then they made all these direct-to-video movies during that time as well, where again he was the voice of Batman. They made 2 different video games that I played that were set in the continuity of the animated series. It was so weird to me the first time I saw a rerun of Super Friends, and it wasn't Kevin Conroy as the voice of Batman. It was this older actor named Olan Sewell, who, he was just playing like an Adam West type Batman. It was like, but that's not Batman's voice.
Yeah, that Batman is a lot closer to the Adam West. Like, it's not quite as campy or as crazy, but Super Friends generally was a little campier and a little more, Silver Age generally, but makes sense because of what it was and when it was, and also the limitation of animation at the time.
Yes. It was just so cool, I guess, to see such continuity in. It was just a beautiful time for continuity because every project I absorbed for Batman media, he was constant in the role. And I have a vivid memory of the first time I watched The Batman, the animated show that was like from 2004 to 2008. And again, this weird feeling, it's like, wow, it's an animated Batman show that's not from like the 70s, and it's not him playing Batman. It was so weird. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's the reality that it wasn't him in the part.
Yeah, and there are not that many actors who have done, or voice actors who have been that iconic. I don't think, like, and again, like you said, it does speak to not just his talent, but also how much DC was doing during that time as far as animation and video games, and how big, like, because I feel like even if somebody else takes over the role from him and plays it as long as he has, I don't think we're going to have the same level of kind of explosion of the superhero genre that kind of happened, in the 90s into the 2000s and 2010s especially, right? Like, it has been really big and really, the whole nerdy geek culture becoming mainstream. And he was kind of at that cusp, between the Tim Burton
stuff, the Joel Schumacher and the new Christian, not Christian Bale. I mean, Christian Bale was Batman, but I forgot the name of the director now. But like, through that evolution of Batman going from, campy to serious, he was kind of a constant in that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and ironically, at a time when the live action movies were getting sillier, there was still a somewhat serious tone maintained in the animated stuff.
Yeah, which was
But
pretty impressive, honestly. I mean, but we've talked about Batman the Animated Series as a project.
yeah. So in 2006, when Justice League Unlimited went off the air, it seemed like that was the end of Kevin Conroy as Batman, because up until that point, he was the voice of that specific version of the character. The idea of him playing Batman outside of that continuity, if you will, like the version, again, that kind of went through all those different shows, the idea of him playing Batman outside of that, it was unheard of. And it was actually kind of sad to think, oh, like this is all done now. We're never going to hear Kevin Conroy as Batman again. And, spoiler alert, he came back to the role in various forms, and there have been many other voice actors who have come along and played Batman very well, just in different ways. So, there was that brief period of time where it was not even 2 years where it seemed like Kevin Conroy was never going to play Batman again. And then after the end of Justice League Unlimited, a lot of the people working on those shows started working on direct-to-video movies for DC. And one of the first films they announced was an anime film called Batman Gotham Knights. Have you seen this one?
No,
Peter?
but I heard about it.
It's an anthology film. It's supposed to be in continuity with the Christopher Nolan movies, so it's set between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And it has 6 different segments, all animated by different Japanese studios. And for the English dub of this movie, even though it's set in continuity with the Nolan movies, so you think it would make sense to have Christian Bale in there, they brought back Kevin Conroy to play Batman. And I mean, as an anime person, I was already kind of excited that we are going to see Batman in anime. But the fact that Kevin Conroy was back, it was like, wow, all things are possible now. We can keep getting him playing Batman and different versions of Batman, not just the same one that we would have been familiar with. Like, he can explore new territory, and the Batman in Gotham Knights it's early in his career, so he's in a very different place than he would be, if it was just like Unlimited or something.
Although there's been, in that continuity, there's been so many flashback episodes that he has played different versions of Batman anyway.
And then 2009, the year after Gotham Knight came out, I would say for a lot of people, it's through him playing Batman in the Arkham games, starting with Arkham Asylum, that there's a whole group of fans who didn't watch the animated series or Justice League or any of that, but they've played the Arkham games, and that's how they know Kevin Conroy's Batman.
Yeah, and those games were huge, because there's a similar thing that happened with Mark Hamill as well, because he was also the Joker in at least, I don't think he did all the Arkham games, but I know he did at least the first 2, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of a spoiler. He does provide his voice to the third, technically Arkham Origins is the third game, but it's a prequel, and it was made by a different studio, and it had a different cast. But the final Arkham game, Arkham Knight, Mark Hamill does provide voiceover for it, even though the Joker at that point in the story is dead. And between 2009 and 2015, there were 3 different Arkham games that came out, and again got to have Kevin Conroy in there playing a different version of the character. And there were some people involved from the animated series involved with writing the story, I believe, but it had a totally different look and a totally different feel. It felt somewhere as a happy medium, at least visually, between the Burton movies, the Nolan movies, and the animated series, and even some of the other comic books that had come out.
Well, I mean, it's hard to level those 3 things together as well.
Yes.
Especially because even within the Christopher Nolan movies, they don't all like the first one has a very different feel than the second and third.
And there's, I had kind of assumed, honestly, I thought he was going to be relegated to the world of Batman cameos in the way that Adam West was. Like
Yeah.
Adam West, after having played Batman, started appearing in a lot of Batman projects, but as like side characters, or he played Thomas Wayne in one show or whatever.
Or he played the
Gray Ghost. Yeah, because in again, going back to the Batman, there was an episode where Kevin Conroy played John Grayson, the father of Dick Grayson, like in the episode that introduces Robin. And Mark Hamill plays Tony Zuko, the gangster who kills him. And I'm like, this is Kevin's career from now on. He's just going to be known as the guy who used to play Batman, and he's going to play side parts in the Batman world. But thankfully, because of the Arkham games and the fact that the different animated direct-to-video movies were going in different directions, it did mean that he was able to play different versions of Batman. So
his career was still mostly Batman, just not Batman cameos and the one iteration.
Yeah. And some of the animated movies he did were, like, there was one called Assault on Arkham, which we've talked about, that was in continuity with the Arkham games. So he was kind of just revisiting the Arkham games version of the character there. He was in an adaptation of The Killing Joke, where Mark Hamill again was back as the Joker. So in that case, they were directly adapting a specific comic book. There were a couple of Superman/Batman movies, Public Enemies and Apocalypse, which were meant to be direct adaptations of comic books. So the dialogue is very punchy, and it's not something you're used to seeing between Batman and Superman. And then they made two movies that were basically revisiting the continuity of the animated series. One called Batman and Harley Quinn, which came out in 2017. And then Justice League versus the Fatal Five, which came out in 2019. I remember watching both of these movies when they came out, and it was cool to see the art style of the DC animated universe just kind of updated. But then, more or less, a lot of the voice actors were the same, and it was kind of like, this is the cool thing about animation, is that actors, by and large, their voices don't change too much, so you can bring them back with fresher, cleaner animation and just keep making the show if you wanted to.
Especially when you've got like adult characters, right? Because it's a little bit different when you've got like, kids or teenagers. But yeah, by the time even though he's gotten older, he was already an adult when he started playing Batman.
And then his final, I guess, main role as Batman was in a show called Justice League Action, which I remember, I've seen clips of it on YouTube. It seems like it was mostly like targeted at little kids, and it had Happy Meals from McDonald's to go along with it. So that checks out.
But you know what? You can play if you can play the gritty and the kid friendly, then you've got some range.
Yeah, and he did an episode of Scooby-Doo and Guess Who as Batman. He did a voice cameo in Teen Titans Go as Batman.
Was he Batman when the original Scooby-Doo version, the original Scooby-Doo show? No, that would probably be the voice actor from Super Friends, right?
Yeah, that was Olan Soul. Yeah. And then I suppose, I think this is cool. Some people, so when they did the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover for the Arrowverse, they brought Kevin Conroy on to play a live action version of Bruce Wayne. Obviously, this came out in 2019, so at this point the man he's like 63 years old. So he's obviously like too old to be an in-service Batman. And that's not meant to be a knock against the show Titans, where Batman's played by a man in his 60s. Anyway, that's another conversation. I guess you don't watch the Arrowverse, right? So you have no idea that he ever did this live action
No, I did
appearance?
not know. But but I do know what the Crisis series is and what it means, and what it means is you can have any version of Batman you want.
He appears in the second episode of the crossover, which is technically an episode of Batwoman.
Okay.
And the story goes that Kate Kane, Batwoman, and Supergirl go to Earth 99 to find Bruce Wayne and recruit him to be one of the Paragons, one of the people who are going to help solve the crisis. And they find a Bruce Wayne who is old and bitter, and he's in like a full body brace, which was meant to be a callback to the comic book Kingdom Come.
Right. Okay.
If you've ever read that. And you basically find out that this is a world where Batman has killed Superman because he doesn't trust Superman. He's basically like a worse version of Bruce Wayne from Batman versus Superman.
Yeah, well,
which was a good twist because
and less likely to help for sure.
I've lost track of how many people I've killed.
The Bruce I knew had a code.
You start with a code. You hang on to it with every self-righteous breath. But then you take one life, then another, then another, then another. You'll see. My Kate put on the cape. Thought she'd succeed where I failed. All she did was get herself killed.
Yeah, and it was a good twist because, we're all like, ooh, he's going to play like Batman beyond Bruce Wayne. He's going to be like super cool. But some people didn't like the fact that he ended up being like an evil Batman. I was like, whatever. It was just so cool to like hear his voice and to like actually get him to embody the part.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Those are things you can do with that type of series or crossover. Is you can do it, play with people's expectation and make it more interesting.
And when watching the behind the scenes kind of featurettes about the crossover, it was clear that many of the writers and producers on these different Arrowverse shows were fans of the animated series and grew up with him as Batman. And it was like a dream for them to like would he do it? Like, could we actually bring him on to be Bruce Wayne for this?
Yeah.
That was cool for me to see. His last credit, I suppose, as Batman is there's this new video game called Multiverses. Have you seen this? It's like a Warner Brothers version of Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
It has like Adventure Time and Game of Thrones and DC and Looney Tunes all as characters that can basically fight each other.
Oh, so it's basically what Space Jam 2 could have been.
Yes. Yeah. And in this, he's the voice of Batman. So that's his most recent credit. I know we had talked about there was that animated series Batman Caped Crusader that Bruce Timm, who had helped create the animated series originally, and some other people were making, and we were speculating that Kevin Conroy was going to come back to play Batman in that, but obviously,
I mean, he probably would have.
He probably would have, and even if they had like started recording stuff with him, since he's now dead, they would have to like do an awkward like recast partway through, and I think that would probably just be better to just find a different actor.
It can work. I mean, Avatar did it, and it wasn't terrible.
Yeah, I suppose. So that's kind of like the timeline of his career as Batman. Again, it's been 30 years now since the animated series started, and he's played the role so many times. Do you have like a particular moment or maybe a favorite appearance you have for Kevin Conroy as Batman?
Man. I do quite... I think I can't pinpoint something specific, but I do like the way Batman is in the Justice League Unlimited, because he's not like always there, but when he is, he's got like, he plays what I would like. I think it's one of the, again, you were talking about good writing, like, and that's not to knock on the voice actor, of course, but like that is kind of what Batman should be. And I think it's fitting that that's also what Batman should sound like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is credited as being the first voice actor to give literally a different voice to Batman and Bruce Wayne. Michael Keaton did this a bit in live action, where when he's Batman, he whispers more. But it's especially evident in the early episodes of the animated series that Bruce Wayne talks like he's just a nice guy. and then it goes to a totally different place when he's
Yeah, but not exaggerated. I don't know. I like, honestly, people have ragged on Christian Bale enough. I don't. But
as they should. No, they should never stop ragging on him for that.
well, but that's the thing, is like he did it in a way that's believably, like, you could, hearing both of them, I believe it's the same person, but I also believe he is acting differently, though not necessarily
But that's
specifically being a completely different person.
I don't know, man. I mean, they sound distinct enough that I wouldn't. I mean, it's hard to say because I'm not in that world. But what always love about his Batman is that it sounds threatening and menacing without having to get into like grunting or like kind of like Clint Eastwood like teeth clenching.
Yeah, he's on the
Like,
cusp of that. He's on the cusp of that.
But he's I guess he just has the range in his voice where he can go to that dark place like the back of his throat or something, and it just sort of comes across authoritative and.
But I think that's the thing, is
threatening.
it is less. It is more of an acting, like it's more like Batman is Bruce Wayne acting, right? And that it isn't like, it isn't Bruce Wayne changing his voice. It is Bruce Wayne changing a character, like being a character. And, you know, regardless of how you feel about, oh no, Batman is the real Bruce Wayne, or, you know, Bruce Wayne is the real Batman, he is still doing something different for the two of them, and they are different characters or different parts of him, whichever way you look at it. He is doing a different voice, but not just to hide his voice, but because they are acting, you know, they are very different people acting very differently.
I didn't realize you'd taken up listening to rock and roll, sir.
You know, I actually did check this against any musical sounds. Computer still can't come close to pinpointing it.
Wayne Manor, one moment, please. A call for Master Bruce from a Dr. March.
Hey, what's up, Doc?
You have bats, Mr. Wayne. Common brown bats. They shouldn't pose a problem. As the weather gets colder, they'll move on.
What about the sound on the tape?
It's actually two sounds, starlings and brown bats. Probably fighting over a nest in your chimney.
Appreciate the help, Doc. I'll return the favor next time you're raising funds. Bye-bye.
This computer checked that fiber against every animal species known to man.
A couple moments that stand out to me. The first one, we've used this clip before in the podcast, but there's a scene in Mask of the Phantasm when, before he's Batman, like young Bruce Wayne is like at his parents' grave, like basically begging them to let him stop because he's like, I didn't count on being happy. It
just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city. They can hire more cops. Let someone else take the risk. But it's different now. Please. I need it to be different now. I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
Another moment that comes to mind is from not Justice League Unlimited, but Justice League. It's an episode where they meet their like doppelgangers called the Justice Lords. Have you seen this one? It's like a world where Lex Luthor becomes president.
Yeah,
and the Flash is killed.
and Superman has to kill him because he doesn't want Lex Luthor to be president, which, you know, is a fair, to some degree.
Yeah, and they basically become like dictators to the United States.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where, you know, Batman is fighting this alternate universe Batman in the Bat Caves.
Think about it. A world where there's no crime, no victims, no pain, and no choice. Who elected you, anyway? Who elected you? The problem with democracy is, it doesn't keep you very safe. It has other virtues, but you seem to have forgotten them. I didn't forget. I just chose peace and security instead. You grabbed power, and with that power, we've made a world where no 8-year-old boy will ever lose his parents because of some punk with a gun.
And that is kind of what I'm trying to do, and it is kind of why I don't trust Superman fully, which you kind of do, but don't. I like that they kept that dynamic in the episode too, that Batman and Superman are still close in both versions, just differently.
And then, yeah, outside of, I will say, I think a lot of people don't like the Killing Joke movie, and there's reasons to not like it. But his performance, like Kevin's performance in that, for me, that's when I felt like, okay, I can tell this guy's getting old, and he doesn't sound the same as he did even 10 years ago. And even his line readings of the lines straight out of the comic, I'm like, I guess my imagined version of your voice when I read it and I hear your voice, it sounds better than what you actually delivered. So I think that was the point for me where I'm like, okay, maybe it is time for you to stop playing Batman and maybe just stick to the side characters or to, move on to different things.
Yeah, it's a tough one though, because you're pretty sure the next guy who plays Batman is going to be basing it off of him. So is it really that bad for him to be still doing it or not? It's a tough one.
Yeah, and I've heard several in interviews, I haven't had conversations with these people, but I've heard other voice actors who've since played Batman say that, of course, they can't help but think of like Kevin Conroy's performance as like the kind of standard operating procedure that they had to then deviate from for the version that they're going to do. So with that all being said, yeah, we've talked about Kevin on the show before, and I mean, I'm sure he'll come up again in passing and whatever, but for those who weren't aware of who he was, hopefully this episode has kind of helped you understand a bit why he isn't so well known in the nerd and geek world, and why he is celebrated as much as he is. I think the last thing I'll share is just a story I've heard him share again through interviews. After 9/11 happened, he decided that he was going to go do some volunteer work. So he was like working in like kind of a soup kitchen that was feeding firefighters and police officers. And so he's like working in the cooking line in the back. He's just talking to the guy next to him about, well, what do you do for them? He's like, oh, I'm a voice actor. He's like, oh, what do you do? He's like, oh, I play Batman. And he's like, no way. And he's like, do the voice. And so he does his voice. And so this guy who's working next to Kevin in the kitchen runs down. He's like, guys, you're not going to believe who's been making your food this week. It's Batman. And someone in the room's like, prove it. And so he, from the back, he like calls out the very famous line, I am vengeance, I am the night, I am Batman. And apparently, like, at least the way he tells it, like the room was like full of applause.
And well-deserved one, I'm sure.
So God rest your soul, Kevin, and we pray for your family at this difficult time.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
For our episode in 2 weeks, we could talk about Black Panther Wakanda Forever, or we could talk about Andor, because I think by that point the last episode will have aired. So what do you think, Beeper? What should we do next time?
I'm a fan of Andor just because I had started watching it mostly for the podcast. And I don't want that to go to waste in some way.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay, so next episode, we'll talk about Andor, and we'll have finished by then. And then, I guess, 4 weeks from now, we'll talk about Black Panther Wakanda Forever.
All right. And then, yeah, that should give me enough time. And now that I live in the city again, I can go to movie theaters a little bit more easily.
So come back to the Batshar podcast next time when we talk about Star Wars Andor, or Andor Star Wars.
Andor, a Star Wars story. Oh, no, they're not using that anymore.
Until that time, I'm
Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch on the flip side.
Next time, column on the podcast.